My name is Susan Smerek. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to tonight's forum featuring the candidates for both the 4th and 5th wards of the Ann Arbor City Council. The candidates will be on the primary election on Tuesday, August 8th. We are broadcasting this evening from the studios of the CTN in Ann Arbor. The League of Women Voters is pleased to be sponsoring these forums. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that does not sponsor candidates or parties, but we do take stands on issues we've studied. One of the League's important goals is to assist voters in making informed choices at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's forum. The League wishes to acknowledge and thank Ann Arbor voters for the many questions they submitted. For this primary, we received 88 questions, which is more than we've received for any other forum. In addition, we wish to thank League members CTN, the Civ City Initiative, and a group of Ann Arbor Pioneer High School students for spreading the word about contributing questions for these forums. We are grateful and wish to applaud your civic commitment. Volunteers from the League of Women Voters are facilitating tonight's forum. Our moderator this evening is Jeffrey Smerek, who will explain the process from here.
Thank you, Susan. And now it's my honor to introduce the two candidates for the Ann Arbor City Council from Ward 4, Mr. Jack Eaton and Mr. Jamie Majera. Thank you, candidates. The forum today will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement of up to 2 minutes. In between, the moderator will ask the questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to a question. At appropriate time, the timers will hold up their paddles with amounts of time remaining and then finally a stop sign. And candidates, of course, please stop when indicated so that we all will have an opportunity to participate. The order of speaking was determined by a drawing before we began. Opening first will be Mr. Jack Eaton. First with a closing statement will also be Jack Eaton. Our timers are League members Mona Waltz and Mike McGregor. We're ready for your opening statement, Mr. Eaton.
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. Thank you to my opponent for both running and for participating in the forum. I especially want to thank everyone who's taking the time to watch this. I'm Jack Eaton, and it's been my privilege to represent the 4th Ward on Ann Arbor City Council since 2013. When I first ran for council, I promised to focus on improving our basic services and maintaining our essential infrastructure. I promised to represent the common sense point of view of 4th Ward residents. I've kept those promises. During my 2 terms in office, the city has made great strides towards catching up on our long neglected infrastructure. I've co-sponsored more than 40 resolutions, most of which were approved with majority support of my colleagues. I believe that democracy works best with a variety of points of view. I'm not always in the majority, but I have had a real impact on the discussion at council. I ask you for your support so that I may continue my work on council. Please vote for me, Jack Eaton, on August 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And now your opening statement, Mr. Majera.
I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters. I'd like to thank, in particular, the students at Pioneer who got involved in getting people to submit questions, and thank you to all the people who submitted questions. 88 is a great number. And thank you to all of the viewers here. My name is Jamie McGarrett, as it's been said, and I'm a 27-year resident of Ann Arbor. And I've been involved in the community in a variety of ways, community organizations, trying to bring an ethic of transparency and resilience and efficiency to the different groups of which I've worked. And I would like to bring that focus to City Council, and also my decision-making skills, my ability to bring people together and reach consensus on difficult issues. And I think it's really important that people get out and vote on August 8th, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGarrett. Now to the questions. Mr. Eaton, you get the first question. In May, 100 gallons of sewage spilled into the Huron River near Nichols Arboretum. This is just one of many such incidents in Ann Arbor over the last few years. What is the City of Ann Arbor's role and responsibility in ensuring these sewage spillages do not continue to occur?
Well, most of the spillage has occurred in construction zones or in areas where our infrastructure has failed. And so our responsibility is first to make sure that our infrastructure is in good condition. We have neglected both sewers and water mains for a decade or so. We are on course to raise fees to afford to improve our maintenance on those facilities, but we should be embarrassed that we're allowing that to happen. The second thing is that we should have tighter supervision over construction sites where that sort of problem might arise. So it's really an internal control problem and a maintenance of our infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And Mr. Majera, the same question to you. What is the city's role and responsibility in ensuring these sewage spillages do not continue to occur?
Sure. So a couple of the spills have been related to construction, but there has actually been a larger issue over the years with sewage spills in that area. I'm actually someone who goes to the ARB several times a week, and you'll notice that smell along the river. That has to do with some outdated infrastructure and several areas which have not been updated and need to be updated. There's been some work that actually just finished within the past week in the ARB along the drive, which has fixed some of that. We need to address our infrastructure in the short term to prevent these things from happening. But also, we have to have a longer term view because we're going to see more flooding and we're going to see more things related to climate change that are going to impact our water systems. And so I think we have to take a long-term approach, maintaining and updating the infrastructure that's there right now that's been causing that, but also looking at what's coming down the road that we're going to need to address.
Thank you, Mr. Majera. And you also had the beginning of the next question. Recently, the Ann Arbor City Council voted 8-3 to indicate how it would allocate revenue from a possible countywide tax to support public safety and mental health services. It's rare for one local government body to give formal feedback to other local bodies, in this case, before the county board even had voted to put a tax proposal on the ballot. Does the Ann Arbor City Council have a responsibility to develop relationships with other public governing bodies, such as the county, the university, library, and schools? In what ways does that currently happen, and do you think there are better ways to develop those relationships?
Sure. So a little bit of history for folks that maybe aren't familiar with this. The state has been cutting mental health funding for several decades now, actually. And the county is facing a shortfall in terms of that, as well as with some of their public safety services in the regions within the county. I think that we do have a role in communicating with other governments larger. It's called regionalism, and regionalism is something that I think is going to be very key. We're seeing some failings, quite frankly, at the federal level and at the state level of government. And so I think having local municipalities communicating with each other in an official capacity such as that is very important. It should be noted that that resolution was non-binding. That was just a communication of what the city would do should that millage be put on the ballot. And it was a way of being transparent to the county as to what the city would do, and also being transparent to voters and taxpayers so that they would be able to provide feedback ahead of time to shape moving forward how that would go. There's a lot that I think we can do in terms of regionalism, and that's one example of, I think, being efficient and transparent in terms of communication and building up relationships with surrounding municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Majera. Now, Mr. Eaton, the same questions to you. Does the Ann Arbor City Council have a responsibility to develop relationships with other public governing bodies, such as the county, university, library, and schools? In what ways does that currently happen, and do you think there are better ways to develop those relationships?
We actually do have relationships with these other bodies. Our staff works closely with the university. I am on the School Transportation and Safety Committee, which is comprised of staff from both the schools and city staff, as well as high-ranking members of those staffs. It's essential that we create areas where those efforts to cooperate save everybody money. And I wholeheartedly support that. It's a matter where we have to be careful about how we approach regionalism, because state law actually sets up methods for forming regional authorities and regional taxing districts. And so that's often the best way to approach a regional problem. For instance, our regional transportation system, AATA. But everywhere that we can cooperate, it's important that we do. So we share dispatching services. We work closely among our police departments, the sheriff, the city police department, and the University of Michigan Safety Department. So it's important that we continue that effort to cooperate and that we make best use of it.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And then you get the first shot at this next question. One of the city's main gateways, South State Street, runs through Ward 4. The City of Ann Arbor has completed both a South State Street corridor transportation study and a South State Street corridor plan. What are your priorities for implementing those recommendations?
Well, while I appreciate long-term planning, we have to be particularly sensitive to the fact that private property owners have great discretion in what they do with their property. I was proud to follow up on one of the recommendations in our corridor plan, which was that we should extend the Allen Creek Greenway from Stimson and State to the southern edge of town. And by having these planning documents in place, we will be able to take advantage of opportunities that arise as that area develops. That area has significant problems with alternative transportation. I get a variety of complaints about the lack of crosswalks, the lack of good bicycle trails, and so it will be good for us to move on those plans, but I believe that we have to work with the private property owners as they develop their properties.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton, and Mr. Majera, to you also. What are your priorities for implementing the recommendations in that South State Street Corridor Transportation Study and the South State Street Corridor Plan?
Yeah, I am very supportive of plans like this. I think that we need these templates basically to work from to better design our infrastructure. It avoids situations where, for example, we've seen some construction projects, some development projects where we did something and then a couple of years later we had to make a quick change because something came down the pipe that meant we had to rearrange the layout of that area or replace pipes and whatever. So I think that these plans are very important. I would put a significant amount of energy towards working towards these plans. We see that there's this thing called transit-oriented development that a lot of municipalities are talking about. Matter of fact, the Ann Arbor Planning Commission was just talking about this last week. And the idea is to do development along transit corridors, improve the transit, do development along there, and then that allows people to get to their jobs. That allows people to get to places where they can get food. This is fundamental because we want people to enjoy all that Ann Arbor has to offer. And also it has to do, again, with climate change, because transportation is a fundamental aspect of climate change. And we want to minimize our contributions in that area in terms of the carbon emissions. So there is a lot to be done, and it's a big thing that we've bitten off with that, but I very much support those types of projects.
Thank you, Mr. Majera. And the first take at the next question goes to you also. The Ann Arbor City Council voted to go forward with the sale of development rights to a private Chicago firm of 360 parking spaces for as long as 50 years on the publicly owned library lot. The Downtown Development Authority, the DDA, is considering plans to raise rates for monthly parking permits and for on-street meters, as well as spending $18 million for additional parking spaces in a downtown structure. How would you have voted on the library lot sale, and why? And what advice would you give to the DDA in cost-effectively and equitably managing the city's parking system?
Sure. So after that vote was taken, the day after that vote was taken by City Council, I released a statement which basically outlined the reasons why I would have voted no. And those reasons relate to the sustainability of that project. It is lacking in some things that I think would serve a greater amount of people with a greater amount of good. One of the things that I've been critical of is our lack of vertical setbacks and things that could provide terracing to allow sunlight to come in, to prevent wind tunnel effect with large buildings, and to provide space for urban gardens, solar panels, rainwater reuse, and things that make a building truly sustainable, and something that the community can be proud of as an example of our environmental stewardship. I think that it's important for people to keep in mind that that project has not ended, although that process has not ended. Although it's been used as political fodder to say, well, this council voted this way, they voted that way, it's important for people to know that they can still be involved in the design review board and other areas in which we can shape that project. In terms of the DDA, I would encourage them to start looking at ways in which we can get around the downtown area, minimizing the amount of single occupant car use. And that will minimize the amount of additional spaces that we need. And there are examples of that we can talk about at another time.
Thank you, Mr. Majera. Now, Mr. Eden, same questions to you. How did you vote on the library lot sale and why? And what advice would you give to the DDA in cost effectively and equitably managing the city's parking system?
I voted against the sale of this property to this particular developer. There were many concerns raised by residents throughout town, but of greatest importance to me was that downtown residents and downtown merchants came to the City Council and told us that dedicating 361 parking spaces in our parking system that's already at capacity would have an impact on their businesses and their livelihoods. And I believe that we have to take seriously the advice that we get from people who are already operating successful businesses in our town. We shouldn't load an impact on them that favors a new business. We have agreed to sell this property. What remains is the site plan process. There's very little discretion in what we can accomplish in site plan approval with regard to rooftop gardens and solar panels and such. We may have been able to put that into a sales agreement, but once the property is sold, it's just simply subject to the planning process that we have, and it's not very demanding. With regard to the DDA and parking, I'm not going to advise them on how to manage their system, but I would note that we raised the issue that dedicating that amount of parking would require very expensive construction, and that will probably be funded with increased parking fees and lengthened parking enforcement hours.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And you are first for the next question. What millage proposals, if any, do you think the City of Ann Arbor should ask voters to approve? What areas do you think are underfunded?
Well, I will, as far as new city millages, I cannot conceive of any particular millage that I would support. Our residents suffer an incredible tax burden in this town, due primarily to the high value of properties in town. So city government has to learn to live within its means. It needs budget discipline. It needs to prioritize its spending It needs to address long neglected areas, infrastructure and services, before we contemplate any increase in revenues. Until we actually show budget discipline, it would be really unwise for us to go to the voters and ask for even more money.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Majera, same questions to you. What millage proposals, if any, do you think the City Council should ask voters to approve? What areas do you think are underfunded?
So right now, I think there are two areas where there should be discussion of millages. I'm not saying that we should have them, but I think we should discuss them and look at why it is. An example of that would be our water infrastructure. So the city is in a situation where, because residents have become so efficient in their water use, they've actually had to continuously raise water rates. So we're in a situation where we're not getting the money that we need for our water system. The dioxane plume is something that concerns all of us in terms of having fresh, clean water and maintaining our public health. This is something that we're looking at. Maybe the Ann Arbor is joined in a court case that might help resolve that. Other municipalities have filed to the EPA for status of a Superfund site. We don't know if either of those are going to work out. It may be necessary to raise funds to manage the dioxane plume ourselves. Another thing is pedestrian safety in roads. It may be necessary to improve our infrastructure to make sure that we are safe and that we are looking towards the future of transportation, to make sure that people can get to their jobs, to make sure that people can get to their necessities, and to make sure that we minimize our contribution to climate change with our carbon footprint.
Thank you, Mr. Majera, and thank you, candidates, for answering those questions. We've now come to our closing statements. The first closing statement will be provided by Mr. Eaton. It's 2 minutes. So, Mr. Eaton.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this forum, and again, thank my opponent for running. It's important that we have a good exchange of ideas. A council member is a policymaker. Anyone can hop onto Google and find interesting ideas or details about something, but a council member's job is to identify the direction we go. The city has excellent staff to do the detail work. So as a council member, I've worked with staff after we identify the priorities that we want. I've demonstrated my ability to listen to and represent the views of Ward 4 constituents. I've worked closely with neighborhoods in Ward 4. I've co-sponsored more than 40 resolutions, most of which have been approved by a majority of council, which demonstrates that I work well with my colleagues. I believe that a council member also needs to show leadership. So when the city withheld information about its train station plans and communications with the Federal Rail Administration, I brought forward a resolution to disclose that information. I believe that residents have the right to know what their government is up to. I also sponsored a resolution to place the issue of the sale of the library lot on the ballot, because petitions that had been circulated to accomplish that had fallen short due to technicalities. Leadership requires a person to speak in defense of our core values. I have a positive vision of our town's future that includes protecting what is good and unique about this town. I've emphasized the common sense priorities of our ward. I believe that City Council can provide excellent services and maintain our infrastructure without raising taxes. Please support me on August 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And now, Mr. Majera, your closing statement, 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this again. This was a great opportunity to speak to the voters and hear what everyone has to say. I'm encouraging people to get out and vote on August 8th. As a 27-year resident, I've worked with a lot of different organizations in the community, and recently a lot of organizations that deal with policy governance. So looking at policy, defining policy, delegating tasks, and overseeing budgets. That has given me a lot of experience in the meat and potatoes, the fundamental stuff of governance. I've also had the ability to be someone who can walk into a room and build consensus. And I think that that's fundamental right now. We're seeing friction at the state level, we're seeing friction at the national level, and we're seeing a perception of a divide amongst people because of these topics such as the library lot and whatnot. And I would actually like to find the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. And I think that I have the skills to do that. I've been endorsed by a lot of council members, members of the Ann Arbor District Library Board, members of the Planning Commission, small business owners, and residents in the 4th Ward and throughout the city, because those people find value in my ability for governance, my ability to build consensus amongst people, and to be a leader amongst all of us. And I would encourage people to check out my website and to contact me if they have any comments or questions. I very much enjoy the dialogue that comes with this process, and would very much enjoy what comes with being a council member in terms of representing people. So again, thank you very much, and I hope I have your vote on August 8th.
Thank you very much, candidates.
Thank you to the candidates for participating in tonight's program, and to the CTN for making this program possible. These forums will be rebroadcast on Channel 19 a number of times between now and the election, and are available on demand for streaming on your computer or smartphone. Go to our website, lwvannarbor.org, and look for the link to the programs. For additional balanced and nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org and enter your address. There you will find information on the candidates and ballot proposals that will appear on your ballot. Be sure to vote on Tuesday, August 8th. Good night.